And I really haven't had much else. As usual, audio, let me know if it needs to be adjusted. And those on YouTube, welcome to your start, of course, of Witch on a Holy Night, a visual novel by Type Moon that was just released at the time we streaming this. I don't know when you guys are going to be seeing it though on YouTube. But we'll see how it goes. I don't know if there's any voiceover or anything, so we'll see. It was a winter's day 8 years ago. The solemn morning when she understood the value of life for the very first time. Her home was nestled on the side of the mountain. Around it was nothing but an hospitable wilderness. She had no neighbors or childhood friends to speak of. Things like traveling to school or playing outside were more trouble than they ought to be. Indeed, with its pure water and bright stars, it was a place rich with memories, but frustrating and okay. Also, even though I speak English, I have issues with words, so yeah, give me a minute with that one. I don't even know how I would even pronounce that. I don't know. I'm skipping that word. That was only during summer, though. Winters in those mountains were extremely frigid, every morning more severe than the last. Her father would drive her to the train station. They're waiting 10 minutes for the engine to warm up and the iced over windows to clear. Her father would savor his morning coffee, leaving her to venture outside and rev the engine. Out the front door she would go, traversing the garden with icy breath until she reached the old sedan. That old sedan. As always, she inserted the key and started the ignition. The engine rumbled to life. Just as she proudly finished that humble task she's done so many times before. What the fuck? A shrill scream pierced the air. She knew, even though it wasn't human, that the feeble sound was a cry of agony. A few moments passed. Her father came out and opened the hood of the car. Creaking fan belts, a monstrous looking engine, and something that didn't belong. There was a cat, a mother by the looks of it, and her two kittens. Oh, holding for warmth in the engine's compartment. The mother cat was missing its head. One of the kittens had been mangled beyond recognition by the engine belts and surely died instantly. The other kitten, its face half covered in blood, panted faintly. It desperately clung to its mother, or rather the chunk of meat that had been its mother, with the last bit of life it could muster. Her father lamented their plight. The previous night had been especially cold. After he had returned home yesterday, cats must have snuck under the hood, drawn by the warmth of the engine. They had slept next to the engine and awoken to a storm of spinning belts. Cars in the 80s were not sealed particularly well, so this was not unheard of. Okay, hold on a second there. Uh, let's turn the music down a little bit. Her father's voice seemed distant. She could only make out a small tuft of the kitten's gray fur. The rest of it was caked in the blood of its mother and brother. I could see its skull. The fragile life of a speckled kitten. Trembling and possibly blind, it continued to nuzzle against its dead mother's chest.
待ちなさい。
She took the kid into her arms and ran deep into the mountains to her grandfather's house. Was it because she was overcome with regret? Or was it the shock of grief years later? She still wasn't sure. Flying back to Wellington Terrace, she burst into her grandfather's workshop. Her grandfather was a magician who could do anything. She had never seen magic. She knew that magic was a fantasy straight out of fairy tales, but so was her grandfather. She had to find him. He was the only one who could help.
その子猫の運命を変えろという。
The cave dwelling magician said indefinitely. Miss Kitten needs our help, she pleaded. Whether it was a simple task or Herculean labor, her grandfather would not say. He simply granted the girl's childish wish like a machine. Oh no, the girl said. Before she knew it, however, she was holding a tiny corpse in her hands. Its fur was cold. The warmth of life had left its body, and the tears she had fought so hard to hold back poured from her eyes. Regret spread through her chest like an endless gray sky.
トロだったな。結局元に戻すとは。
Her mind struggled to come to grips with what had just occurred. The last 10 minutes were a total blank. Who she met, what she had known, it was all as if it never happened. The only thing she was sure of was that life, once extinguished, can never return.
そこに誰かいるの？
That day, it was her mistake that gave birth to me. Indeed. Wait, what? Whatever occurred that day, it was a day of nostalgia and longing. This is the fairy tale of 8 years ago. The day they first met that no magic can ever bring back. What the hell is going on? Arrogant, greedy, and able only to destroy, I must be a wolf. I don't have regrets. There's no looking back. If my pride has left you behind, my sincere condolences. But at any rate, I suppose it's my fate to die at the hands of Little Red Riding Hood. Guess we're on chapter 1. Strange one. It was a quiet morning. From her bed, she could see the sky was an ashen watercolor gray. The thermometer displayed 43 degrees Fahrenheit, a rather unforgiving temperature in November. Ha! Ha! 43. I'm still walking around in just pants and a t-shirt. What? Huh? Huh? Okay. Her stomach woke her up with a growl, practically reminding her that she had completely missed breakfast. But lazy mornings like today were, for her, a blessing. It was already well past 8 in the morning. On any ordinary weekday, turning this would be unavoidable, but today, classes were canceled in commemoration of the school's anniversary. Of course, Japanese schools. Sadly, we don't get that here in the States. Gratefully, she had every intention of taking it easy for the first time in ages. Outside the window was a gloomy gray, and it reminded her more of evening than morning. Wasn't a pleasant morning by any stretch of the imagination. Or stretch of the imagination. Why am I adding words out? What the hell? But having been up all night until just 3 hours ago, she couldn't care less about the weather outside. Almost sounds like me. I get very little sleep. All she cared about was more sleep. Yeah, no, I can't. As long as she could spend her morning in bed, what was happening outside was of no concern to her. She shut the curtains, then closed her eyes and tried to sleep. Tried to let sleep reclaim her. Again, why?
せめてあと2時間ぐらいは凡庸な夢を見ていられますように。
I'm glad, even though the text is English, it does have the Japanese voice actors. Thank you, at least for that. Blissful slumber found her soon enough. Her consciousness faded. However, oh, I hear a damn phone. Her simple request would be mercifully refused. A faint but shrill sound lingered in her ears. It was the unmistakable ring of a telephone. Much to her chagrin, her eyes popped open out of
こ
habit.
んな日に限って。
Yeah. The telephone was situated in the foyer on the first floor. For those that don't realize, this is set in the 80s. This isn't modern day. Answering it meant walking down a 30-foot corridor and going down a flight of stairs. In her sleep-deprived state, that distance seemed somewhere between incredibly far and astronomically far. Ugh. English, come on. The phone's insistent ringing continued. She knew the caller would eventually give up if she ignored it, but she chose to fight the urge.
アリス出ないの？
Alice must be a maid or something. She thought her housemate would get it, but she soon had to abandon all hope. The realization struck that her housemate did not have the day off from school and was likely in class at her prestigious little hilltop academy. The caller proved incredibly persistent. That persistence made the volume of the ringing seem even louder.
もうせっかくの安眠を。
Makes me wonder, is this still the same person from the beginning? She was left with no choice but to get up, throw a top on, and leave the room. She rubbed her hands together to warm her numb fingers. The mansion's heating system was inadequate, to say the least. Well, no shit. Which meant that winter was the very worst of uninvited guests. Never more so than on a dreary morning like this when one didn't need to use a thermometer to know how cold it was. The mansion sat in the mountains and is surrounded by dense forests. Winter always arrived here first, before moving on to nearby towns. The robotic ring of the telephone reverberated throughout the long hallway. The mansion's furnishings had been so perfectly maintained that it made the place feel unlived. It seemed lonelier than it did splendid. Coupled with the dreary morning, it could have passed for a haunted house.
ま、幽霊屋敷そのものだけど。
Wait, what do you mean by that part? What? 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 Okay, that's throwing me off there.
だいたい2人で住むには広すぎるのよ、この家は。
Oh, there's only two in the mansion. What the hell? She counted more than 30 rings since it first began. The caller either had a lot of free time on their hands or had a good understanding of the house's circumstances. She had a strong hunch that it was the latter. The window above looked out onto a gloomy sky. She hastened to catch the unrelenting ring and act as soon as possible, though she had a feeling that her happy morning night might come to a close the moment she caught it. It was here that a series of incidents began. Apologies for the lack of romance in this tale. It's a type moon. I would not expect there to be romance. For whether it be objectively true or merely su- su- supposition, it was always from gloomy and unassuring beginnings that extraordinary events are set in motion. Do we get another Ren character? Oh, oh, oh. We might have a Ren character here. For those that don't know, Type Moon, Fate Stay series. Ren, one of the mages in the Holy Grail War. Any of their things seem to have a Ren character. Be it Tsukihime, Fate, or Garden of Sinners. There's a Ren character. Which usually the Ren character is the best girl. I hate to say it. Ooh, long hair, maybe. One of these times I might do a watch along with you guys on streams. Gotta figure out how to do that without copyright strikes. So we're following the red umbrella. Mm. Which on the Holy Night? You better not be talking about Holy Grail War or anything like that, please. Then again, Garden of Sinners wasn't about Holy Grail War, and near was Tsukihime. So I don't know what type Moon's got with this one. Looks like we're at school. The rain had subsided somewhat by the time she reached the school gate. Sunlight seemed to be playing peekaboo behind the clouds in the distance. It looked like it might be cleared up by early afternoon.
と言っても私には関係のない話だけど。
The weather reflected her luck. On top of being forced out of the house at such an early hour, she had to suffer through the winter rain. I'm getting a bad feeling about this. The sinking feeling she had only grew as she passed through the entrance and headed inside. She didn't encounter any other students along the way. Well, they shouldn't be. Nor did she see anyone taking part in club activities either. The reception desk to the facility room simply read facility closed. The school had given all its students the day off, except those explicitly summoned like her. A fact that irked her more and more as the minutes passed. She opened the door to the facility room and headed toward the desk she had visited a number of times before. The man at the desk wore a plain shirt and suit that were nonetheless neatly pressed. Slim framed glasses adored his face, giving off an acceptable yet cunning air. The mild manner image this mid-20s man presented clashed with the cigarette he smoked. Of course, he didn't appear to have noticed her yet.
Yamashiro-sensei.
Yes, Yama, Yamashiro, huh? She closed the door with a bang. Showing no response to the sudden sound, Mr. Yamashiro lifted his head.
やあ、おはよう、青崎くん。要件
Okay.
は聞いているかな？
Aozaki, huh?
はい。1時間前に自宅で事前に何の相談もなく。
Of course. Having graduated from this high school himself, Mr. Yamashiro was not much older than the rest of the students. For that reason, the students preferred him over the other teachers. He always had something interesting to talk about and kept conversations casual. In fact, he seemed more like an older student than a teacher, but she unfortunately didn't share her fellow students' fondness for him. She was of the opinion that teachers should come across as more austere. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Like an iron fist that could inspire both love and hate in equal measure, not a buddy to joke and pal around with. He was the exact opposite of how she felt a teacher should be. It was only natural that her manner towards him would be forced and unfriendly. Not that she'd ever been wired to make friendly small talk.
はあ、今日もご機嫌斜めみたいだね、君は。
Well, yeah, she couldn't sleep.
それは先生の気のせいです。今日だけ特別という話ではありませんから。
The matter-of-fact answer perfectly matched the displeasure displayed on her face. Her bad mood from having to get up early and the tiredness from staying up late must have collectively made her look positively adversified.
そうならいいんだけどね。彼にはそう辛く当たらないでくれよ。僕らじゃ正直どう扱っていいかわからないところもあるし。
Oh, great, we got a guest. Oh, great.
先生、その件ですけど、私まだ詳しい話を聞かされていないのですが。
As Mr. Yamashiro met her piercing eyes, he finally understood the reason behind her tone and slowly put out his cigarette.
電話じゃあなんて聞いたの？
転入生の紹介をするとだけです。理由も脈絡もない説明でした。
Oh no. One of Mr. Yamashiro's eyebrows stood up, impressed by the brutality of her answer. He could see that she was angry, not because she had been called to school on her day off, but because she hadn't been told why she was here. Mr. Yamashiro chuckled sympathetically.
先生、これが笑い話ならそろそろ帰っていいでしょうか。
いや、ごめんごめん、謝るよ。冗談じゃなくて真面目な話なんだ。ちょっと君の手を借りたくてね。
Of course.
本当に転入生の問題で。
訳ありというか難しいというか。
Difficult circumstances? Oh, great. What?
彼、宗十郎くんと言うんだけど、ちょっといろいろとずれていてね。 僕らが案内してあげるより同世代の君の方が適任だと思ったんだ。
She threw him an unamused look. It was negligent of them to be pushing teaching duties on her, but she did wonder how exactly this transfer student was peculiar. Maybe he meant the student had behavior problems or was difficult somehow. But peculiar, she didn't have the slightest idea what that meant.
ずれてるなんてそう使わない表現だけど。
Yeah, that's not normal. She had her doubts but swept them aside for now. This wasn't the time to get distracted by more concerns. The fact remained that this conversation was all the peculiar she could handle. She had more information. She was already beginning to fantasize about saying no and curling up in her warm bed at home.
一つ質問があります。
Of course you do.
何？あ、学年は君と同じ2年生だよ。性格は落ち着きがあって人の話をよく聞くタイプ。裏を返せば覇気がないとも取れるけど、それならそれで付き合いやすいだろ。青崎くんとはクラスは違うけど、きっと仲良くな。
そういったことは本人から直接聞きますし、測ります。そうではなく、なぜ私なんでしょうか。
Let's say, why her? Though her tone was still stern, it was clear she was willing to cooperate. She had decided to put her feelings of dissatisfaction aside and focus on the task at hand. No shit. Forcing herself to act empathetic in spite of her self-absorbed nature was something she was used to. Paradoxically, this force of will was also the reason teachers put so much faith in her. To a point. At times, that strength shattered expectation, and on those occasions, they were left with no choice but to treat it like a natural disaster and weather it until it passed. That was how Mr. Yamashiro had come to deal with her for over the past year.
もう一度だけ聞きます、山城先生。それで、なぜ私なんでしょうか。
Pressured by a question without a clear yes or no answer. He answered, oh great. Place your bets, what's his answer going to be? Of course. Games are on sale, no shit. Yeah, you guys can go away on that. Giving you guys a chance to even come up with your own idea what's going to happen here.
うん、それはね。別に青崎くんが先生方に敬遠されているのと同じぐらい信頼されていて、学校のためなら教師も生徒も一緒くたに切って捨てる鉄の生徒会長だからじゃないよ。
それ以外にこんな呼びつけを受ける理由はないと思いますけど。
Her eyes did nothing to hide her disbelief as she glared at him. Strength far beyond that of an ordinary 17-year-old girl, coupled with the youthful beauty of one. Mr. Yamashiro let slip a genuine smile, admiring the miraculous balance of qualities.
いや、責務だけでいいなら僕がやってるさ。この人選に関しちゃ教師や生徒会長といった役職も関係ないよ。なんていうか、こんな頼みを損得抜きで聞いてくれるのは君だけだと思ってね。
In other words, he knew she wouldn't say no.
山城先生。
She's not happy.
うわ、怖っ。もう睨まない睨まない。言ったろ、僕にはともかく彼には笑顔でって。とまあ、納得してくれたならすぐに移動しよう。もう随分待たせてしまっているからね。それと雨の中ご苦労様。帰りはもちろん車で送るよ。
Mr. Yamashiro stood up gracefully. He's been saying it! I'm good, thanks, she replied before turning and walking out of the faculty room. He had been waiting for about an hour. While he did, the rain shower lightened into a drizzle. His mind wandered as he listened to the sound of the raindrops. The room was filled with neatly arranged rectangular tables. Has to be the um student council room. He was the only one there. Quite some time had passed since he had been brought to this room and asked to wait. Even the best behaved student might have grown dissatisfied or anxious with the situation by now, but the boy stuck to his spot like a scarecrow. He was chilled to the bone. It was the end of November and the low temperature in the morning had marked the start of winter. The room was not much warmer. The heater hadn't been turned on either. He missed the teacher telling him to turn it on, or he never seen one in his life. He breathed lightly on his freezing fingers as he aimlessly surveyed his surroundings. This dreary place was apparently a meeting room. The other students might have considered a wonderful place to meet, but to him it was drab and overly spacious. It was a lifeless place that reminded him of an art cave. Stuck in this cold room with absolutely nothing to do, his mind turned to what they wanted to discuss. Unable to come up with a solid answer, he returned his attention to the sound of the rain. The rain hardly resembled the rain in the mountains, though he could still recognize it barely. Its smell and sound were harsher, but at the end of the day, rain was still rain. So even this world, alien as it was, could have something in common with the mountains. That trivial detail perked him up a little. So he's from the mountains. He liked how the town looked, soaked in rain. Naturally, he preferred sunny weather, but he liked rain in its own way. The fog from the rain had soaked up the scent of the soil and it reminded him of home. It was at times like these that he was able to numb the anxiety the city gave him. But then he let out a discouraged sigh. How pathetic. He's already been here 2 weeks and thought of his hometown still made him sound sad. Ugh. Perhaps feeling that he was being unfair to his new life, he compressed himself and continued to wait patiently, as if having a passion for distractions, his attention returned to the sound of rain once more. Waiting like this didn't seem to be particularly hard for him. He quietly endured the numbing cold an hour alone with calm, deep breaths. As the saying goes, good things come to those who wait. Strong point of his or not, he was astonishingly patient. It was certainly helping him out in this moment. She, on the other hand, was livid. The profile of the transfer student had been explained to her on the way to the meeting room. She was told he had lived his whole life up in the mountains without any electricity. That meant more than half of civilized society would have been an utter mystery to him.
なんて絶望的な断絶。戦後どころか戦前の話じゃない。ロビンソンにも程がある。
Whoever that is. She had every right to be angry. His village had apparently remained isolated in the mountains for many years. Contact with villages in the foothills of the mountain only occurred once a month or so, which was unfathomable in modern Japan. Although expressways in Japan Rail, the old national railways now, spanned the country like arteries, it wasn't entirely impossible for mountain villages like his to exist. But she couldn't imagine how someone born to such circumstances would think or live.
電気がないって、村に行き渡っていないだけで公衆電話ぐらいはあったんですよね。
なかったそうだよ。こっちに暮らすようになってまず驚いたのが電話だそうだし、電話って便利ですねなんて真顔で言われてね、そういえばそうだなぁと再確認させられたぐらいだよ。
She shot a sidelong glare his way as he laughed. It seemed that the nativity of the country boy had cheered up Mr. Yamashiro a bit.
駐在もいないってことか。うちも実家は山奥ですから、電気が通っていないのはありえないとは言いませんけど。そいつ、学校も知らないんですか？
うん。どんなものかは知っていたそうだけど、実際来るのは今日が初めてらしい。それで緊張していたのかな。あまり会話も弾まなかった。ああいうのも野生児っていうのかな。狼に育てられた狼少年みたいな。あ、いや、探検隊の話だね。
I did it before she did.
怖いな、青崎くん。冗談だって。そう、睨まないでくれ。大丈夫。話してみた感じ、おとなしい子だったから。なんていうか、言葉の通じない小動物みたいな感じ。
Why do I have a feeling he's the cat?
山城先生、その例え、気休めになってませんから。
As she gave her blunt reply, she tried to stimulate in her mind what life without electricity would be like, but the thought of it took her sour mood from bad to worse. After all, it was a world she had never known. She could understand why the teachers had given up. She too wanted to give up and return to her warm bed, but her good for nothing pride was holding her hostage. Not only did the teachers believe she was up to the task, but she also believed she could do it. It wasn't that easy to go back on her word no matter how bad things looked after the fact. She walked along the hallway, the rain pattering in the background. The meeting room was already in sight. With a furrowed brow, she fixed her long hair in anticipation of meeting the unknown stranger within. Her elegant strides were like those of a confident general going into battle.
いや、青崎くん、君を信頼してる僕だけど、念のため確認しておくよ。なんていうか、優しくね。で、
作り笑いは苦手です。一応努力しているつもりですが。
ああ、そうなんだ。それはよかった。いやー、ほんとよかった。青崎くんにも苦手なものってあったんだね。
Mr. Yamashiro's shoulders slumped the second they reached the meeting room. As he put his hand on the door, his eyes seemed to say to her, "Be nice, please." This only made her more irritated. Of
わ
course.
かってるわよ。愛想が悪いってのは。でも笑顔なんて意識して作るものじゃないんだし。だいたいそういうインスタントな人付き合いなら飛び丸の方が向いてるって。
She sighed about her social shortcomings, but then it occurred to her that being called into school on a day off while sleep deprived wasn't anything to smile about anyway. She also thought the person responsible for this mess would be better off attending elementary school. It might not be his fault, but neither was it her duty or obligation to do the teacher's work for them. At the very least, they could have used their brains and organized all this on a normal school day, another complaint she wanted to voice later.
いや、というか敵。なんであろうと敵。悪いけど、情状酌量以前に敵。間が悪いのはお互い様っていうか、ほんと、なんでよりにもよってこんな忙しい時に。
Her pounding headache from the lack of sleep had boosted her aggression by 10%. No matter how harmless the guy on the other side of the door may be, anyone who disturbed her sleep was the enemy. And just as she was reaching peak annoyance, Mr. Yamashiro opened the door to the meeting room. The room slowly slid into view. She didn't care for formalities, just looked straight ahead and stormed into the room, and found herself face to face with the most unusual opponent. Uh-oh. Before we go on, let's see from another perspective. Turning back the clock just a little. You don't have to do anything. For some, these words are priceless luxury. For others, they are unbearable torture. Oh, we're looking from his perspective now. For the proactive girl, it was definitely the former, though she'd be too suspicious of the motives of anyone giving her such a gift to accept it. For the passive boy, it was definitely the latter, a bitter thorn that made him homesick, though at this very moment his mind was still distracted with the wait for his face to reveal any discontent. He maintained perfect posture as he stared at the gray sky. He had already waited a whole hour, but Faraday must have had their reasons for making him wait, and as long as he had the sound of the rain to soothe him, he could keep on waiting.
でもそろそろ9時を過ぎるのか。どうなんだろ
He had been vaguely keeping track of the time as he listened to the rain. Due to the holiday, the school building was completely silent, except for the patter of the rain on the window. The mood felt as damp as the air. It was then he heard the heavy clatter of footsteps
う。よ
approaching.
かった。忘れられているかと思った。
He could hear two sets of footsteps, one heavier set belonging to an adult. He breathed a sigh of relief as the door slid open.
すまないね。ずいぶんとお待たせしちゃって。
The first person he saw was a man wearing glasses and an awkward smile. That's Mr. Yamashiro, the one who brought me here.
ってあれ里中先生いないんですか。ひどいなあ。話し相手になってあげてと言ったのに。
Mr. Yamashiro scratched his head, looking increasingly apologetic. And then, from behind him, with a tight lip expression that made it clear she didn't want to be there, of course, a dark haired girl with a determined look in her eyes appeared. And now we finally get to see them both fully. Or are they still going to admit parts? Ooh, ooh, ooh. Nope. They're going. Okay, there's him. I hate to say this, Type Moon, but why are we getting their Shiro character? Why your main male characters have to always look the same? I mean, she's going to look like Ren. Sojiro gulped. The sound of the rain on the window faded into nothingness. That's when he knew. This was how it felt when time stood still. And yep, it's a Red character. Of course it is. She blinked quickly a few times as if taken aback. Why was anyone's guess? The boy was everything she expected a naive country boy to look like. However, she felt something she couldn't understand. His eyes widened slightly if taken aback. The reason was obvious. Putting his feelings into words was a different matter altogether. So we will never know exactly what he experienced in that moment. That's when it hit him. He sensed he'd been touched by the hands of destiny.
紹介するよ。彼が転入生の静木宗十郎くん。
Suzuki Sojiro.
で、こっちの彼女が静木くんの案内役。うちの生徒会長で休日を押して新しい仲間の案内役を買って出てくれた青崎青子くんだ。
Of course. His voice and the sound of the rain seemed distant. This is how they first met. Such was their start, for better or worse, like the ethereal beauty of fireworks. And it was commonly believed among the students that Akko was always in a foul mood. But this gossip was 90% prejudice, as Akko seemingly didn't have time to be irritated 24/7. The reality was she simply didn't want to explain herself all the time, and therefore seemed angry about something, obvious or not. This idle gossip did, however, lead to her earning the title as one of the school's 7 deadly threats. The remaining 10% of the gossip was right on the mark. Akko herself often had a feeling that her tendency to feel animosity toward harmless things was akin to what a chronic headache sufferer might experience. Today fell under that 10%. For today, her anger was pure, and her childish and selfish display was befitting of her actual age. The meeting room was dimly lit, awash in the colors of the rain. To reduce electricity costs, school regulations forbid the use of lights during the day. This was the setting the three of them found themselves in. Her first impression was that his calm demeanor reminded her of a field of wildflowers. In spite of his perfect posture, his overall felt placid, tame even. And though describing him was as meek would be going too far, at the very least he was passive. Even though even through his uniform, she could see that he was thinner than average. His dark hair was unkempt, and he came across as a wholly unforgettable boy. If she had to look at him in a more positive light, she would describe him as a young man than a boy. More as a young man than a boy. It was his calm demeanor that made him seem more mature. Was that the cause of Akko's reasonless reaction? He seemed almost too at home in the meeting room. She was left with the impression that it was her and the teacher, not this outsider, who were the guests here. She felt an unidentified aggression building within her, almost as if her right to be here was in question. Akko felt herself raising her natural defenses.
信じられない。私、今わけもなく怒ってない。
She hated not understanding things, her own emotions in particular. It pained her less than you would imagine for a perfectionist like her, but it still nagged her like a thorn in her side.
ほら、青崎くん、挨拶してあげなくちゃ。
Mr. Yamashiro's attempt to relieve the tension was equally irritating. Yeah, I would have told the teacher to fuck off.
挨拶
After casting a nasty glance in the teacher's direction, Akko turned to face the boy. From the outsider's perspective, it might have looked like a stare down. And in that instant, the clamation of her emotional state hurtled toward the incident boy and scared him. Uh-oh.
いや、待たせたね、しずきくん。
Hearing his name, Sojiro came to his senses. His stunned gaze shook loose. He took a deep breath to clear his head. Chucking up to nerves, Mr. Yamashiro broke out a smile and turned to the girl standing beside him.
紹介するよ。彼が転入生のしずき宗十郎くん。で、こっちの彼女がしずきくんの案内役。うちの生徒会長で休日を押して新しい仲間の案内役を買って出てくれた青崎青子くんだ。
Having been introduced by Mr. Yamashiro, the girl took a step forward. Her eyes were merciless. Her stare, an unspoken threat to violently trample her opponent. Sojiro, on the other hand, managed to keep his own composure despite the shock of how confidential she appeared. He had never been greeted quite like this before, but supposed, mistakenly, that this is how people treated each other in the city. The exchange must have looked quite dramatic to an onlooker. A girl ready to brawl, an earnest country boy desperate to understand. It was a murderous limbo, especially for anyone in the room with them. Poor teacher. Like Mr. Yamashiro, for example. Of course. While he had thought he had made the right decision in choosing an honor student to help him out, she was in an unexpectedly bad mood, and the tension in the air was undeniable. It was this moment that he realized his failure. His realization had come far too late. One false move and this girl, for whom no problem was too large, would becoming a storm that would rock the very foundation of the school. Just as an already Joker card could bring either fortune or disaster, the solo teacher who had been present at the time would come to bear the blame for the scandal that ensued.
ああ、うん、いけてる。二人とも気は合うようだね。
Shush and run!
それじゃあ、僕はこの辺でいいかな。
Mr. Yamashiro laughed nervously as he crept towards the door.
僕は職員室にいるから、終わったら来るように。いいかい、青崎くん。くれぐれも、くれぐれもだぜ。なんていうか、生徒会長としての度量の広さ、この際僕に信じさせてほしいかな。
Mr. Yamashiro left, leaving the two in a locked eye state, one in which one set of eyes was doing all the glaring. All that remained in the room was an artless boy and a cross-armed guarded girl. The two lingered in silence. They resembled shogi players agonizing over their first moves, though it was only Akko who was reading so much into the situation. She decided to put her irritation aside for the time being. With no reason to feel revulsions for him in the first place, she sighed deeply and faced Sojiro.
まあいいわ。山城先生がヒルアンドンなのは今に始まったことじゃないし。それで、あなた名前は？
Her tone was nothing if not reproachful, though he had done nothing to offend her. But the boy failed to pick up on it. Incapable of such venom himself.
ああ、静木宗十郎かな。君は青崎さんだったね。
For whatever reason, he came across as happy in his response.
さんはいいわ。柄じゃないから。こっちは静木くんでいい？
いいって何が？
だから呼び方。くんづけでいいかって聞いてるの。何よ。おかしなこと言った私。
いや、すごく。
The boy replied immediately as if it was a natural response, but quickly second-guessed himself.
いや、いいんだ。ごく一般的なんだろう。静木くんで頼む。君は青崎でいいんだよな。
よろしく。
She followed her blunt reply with a swift turn away from him. While she was hardly thrilled at the prospect of the task at hand, it had been entrusted to her and was her personal policy to see it through to the end.
悪いけど、優しくしてあげる気はないから。時間も惜しいし、手早く行くわよ。
それは助かる。やっぱり時間は大切だ。
Akko's blunt rancor was lost on him once again. Humans tend to be overly cautious when being ignored, whatever form that takes. But despite being peeved at landing none of her attacks, Akko did her best to act professional and directed her guest into the hallway. There was no sunlight in the hallway, nor any sign of life. This was more like a prison than a cave. That was the meeting room. As it dawned on Akko that the hallway matched her mood, she sighed again once more.
まず聞いておくけど、山城先生から聞いたことは理解してる？
ああ、学校の仕組みについては分かった。この建物全部に同い年の人間がいるなんて、ちょっと想像できないけど。
そう、よかったわね。
Akko rubbed her forehead. This Sojiro kid had no idea what he was in for. Apparently, all he heard about school was that it was a place where a lot of people met to study. High school teachers imparted to students their knowledge in various fields of study while fostering discipline and creativity. But never did Akko imagine that she would have to explain the concept of the school itself to someone. Yes, fundamentals were important, but this was absurd. She had serious doubts whether he could handle classes, but Mr. Yamashiro insisted that things would work out somehow. Sujiro had managed to pass the transfer exam, after all, barely.
ま、私には関係ないけど。
Akko grumbled mentally as she walked down the hallway. She consoled herself with the fact that today would be the only day she'd spend with this boy out of time. Or at least she'd try to keep it that way. Yeah, right.
青崎、
He asked calmly, trying to get her attention.
何？
こっちも一つ聞いていいかな。
だから何？
俺の気のせいだと思うんだが、君はまるで何かを睨んでいるように見える。やはり今朝は悪いものでも。
His gaze revealed earnest concern, as if asking her if she remembered to eat breakfast. Oh no! It was like another hammer to her head. It was true that Akko had been glaring at Sanjuro the entire time. Glaring red hot daggers, in fact. Not just at him, but the universe. Even on her best day, her roommate used to remark.
青子の視線は普通の人には厳しいわ。もう少し多くのことに寛大になるべきね。
She'd been warned that her emotions were so naked on her face that people treated her like a powder keg. How naive could the boy be that he could not pick up on this?
私をバカにしてるってわけじゃなさそうよね、この場合。
Even she found her own attempt to reassure herself unconvincing. It began to dawn on Akko, far too late, that compared to her, this laid-back transfer student might as well have been from another planet.
いいわ。言葉にしないとわからないようだから言うけど。あなたの気のせいじゃなくて、私は視線で遠回しに感情を表現してたの。いちいち声に出すのも、会話にするのも面倒だから。
In response to her words, the Martian clapped his hands together.
なるほど。どうしてそうしたいのかはわからないが、確かにそっちの方が手っ取り早い意思表現だ。
Sanjuro accepted her reason without argument, though he still had no idea what kind of emotions she was trying to express. It was as if he could hear the words but didn't grasp the meaning. Ideas that should have connected were instead separated into blocks.
確かにずれてるわ、こいつ。
Mr. Yamashiro's words made sense to her now. What was odd about this boy went way beyond naivety. A stranger in a strange land he may be, but it was only civilized to forgive him some jet lag induced confusion.
じゃ、とりあえずあなたの教室に行くから。
She had regained her composure. Sanjuro raised his hand and stopped in his tracks.
あと一つ。
Akko waited for Sanjuro to continue. The boy was patient to a fault. She rubbed her forehead with her hand again, nursing a vague feeling of uneasiness.
これもちょっとした疑問なんだが、なんで君は怒ってるんだ？怒るのが商売とか、そういう家柄の人なのか？
A long silence. Oh, no shit. Though she knew it wouldn't change the situation, she remembered her regret at answering the phone that morning. He meant no harm. She repeated this thought like a mantra, an attempt to keep her impulses in check.
別にあなたのせいじゃないから気にする必要はないわ。ただ、この一瞬とお昼まで眠っていた場合を計りにかけたら、あまりに利益の違いがあって頭を抱えただけよ。
With that vague answer, she started to walk again, and turned her gaze away from this rude stranger named Sanjuro Suzuki. While what constitutes normal is certainly up for debate, most would undoubtedly refer to him as so. He was a simple and nice boy with nondescript features. If he were an ice cream flavor, he would be vanilla.